One of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history happened in our own backyard. The Virginia Tech massacre claimed the lives of 32 students and faculty members in April 2007. After that tragedy and others across the country, there were rallying cries and questions. Could it have been prevented? And how can we know if someone is a potential shooter? Dr. Denise Bissler, a criminology professor at Randolph-Macon College, is here to offer some insight. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
You often hear these mass shootings lumped together with the mental health debate, but do most of these shooters have a diagnosable mental illness?
In reality, not necessarily. So often they don't have a criminal or mental health history. In about 50% of the cases they will. Often depression is linked, but we don't have a clear connection between mass murder and a psychiatric diagnosis. So mental health screenings would often get too many false positives. It would look like people would be more likely to commit a mass murder who never would even become violent, let alone commit a mass murder. Often there's not a clear diagnosis or a criminal history either.
And looking at all of the shootings, they are all so very different, but there's one similarity that many of them are men.
Absolutely. So we don't have a clear profile. These cases are so rare. Often the shooter is dead, either by suicide, by cop. So we don't get to interview them. So we don't have a great profile. They tend to be almost overwhelmingly male, right? 95% of the cases are men, white, over the age of 30.
In the cases where they do know more of a motive, revenge is often brought up. How can people know if somebody is actually going to act on a threat that's made?
So that's the trick, right?
Yeah.
The prediction is likely impossible in these cases, which isn't what anyone wants to hear, but it would be very difficult to predict. There are some signs though. There's leakage, something called leakage, and that is the idea that many of them will tell someone or post on social media or make a video or a manifesto that they are planning this attack. And the warning signs are that if you see an attack or a plan for an attack that is well thought out, they're planning the attack, they're planning an escape, they're stockpiling weapons, they're gathering ammunition, that's really concerning. And calling a hotline in that case would be certainly reasonable, especially if your workplace or your school has a hotline where you can make those calls and have a threat assessment team decide whether it's credible or just sort of someone spouting off or joking.
Are there any other signs that people need to look for in a potential shooter?
Certainly they tend to be, they have suffer a lifelong of frustration, lifelong sense of failure, and they tend to externalize blame for those failures on other people. And that's where the motive of revenge can come in. They may be vengeful towards a certain target that they think wronged them, or a certain group of people that they blame for whatever has happened to them. So that's a commonality. They also tend to be socially isolated. Some people argue that they're loners to begin with. Others argue that they become socially isolated because of rejection. Bullying has been linked, but that's another thing that is more assumed than something that we really see an empirical, data-driven link. In fact, many of them were both bullied and bullies. So the research is showing that they were both victims and perpetrators of bullying. So again, the link it's not as much causal as correlated. So many people are bullied or loners or suffer rejection, and they will never become violent or mass shooters. So we have to be really careful about prediction and causality. Those things may be themes and they may be one of many motives, but we don't exactly know how they work to which ones will become mass murderers and which won't.
Well, we know that so many people are talking about this. Thank you for adding to the conversation today, Dr. Denise Bissler.
Thank you for having me.